The small church in Ridgway, Colorado smelled of old wood and white lilies that would be gone by morning. Wyatt Mercer stood in the front row, 34 years old and feeling every one of them like stones in his pockets. His daughter Juno pressed against his side, 9 years old and holding a single white chrysanthemum with both hands, because she'd seen it done that way in a movie once. The oak casket rested at the center of the altar, polished to a shine that Silas Buck Mercer would have found unnecessary and vaguely embarrassing. Pastor Frank Morrison stood behind the pulpit reading from a worn Bible, his voice steady in the way of men who'd buried half the county over 40 years. Wyatt tried to focus on the words, but his mind kept circling back to the phone call 3 days ago. Your grandfather passed in his sleep, heart failure, 84 years and gone like a candle in wind. The call had come at 6 in the morning to Wyatt's one-bedroom apartment in Denver, the place he'd been living since the divorce 8 months prior. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. A fold-out couch where Juno slept every other weekend according to the custody agreement Vanessa's lawyer had drawn up with surgical precision. Behind him, Uncle Ellis shifted in his seat for the 3rd time in as many minutes. The wooden pew creaked under his weight. Aunt Nadine sat beside him with her arms crossed, eyes wandering toward the stained glass windows rather than the casket that held her father-in-law. Neither of them had visited Buck in over a decade, but here they were now, dressed in black and checking their phones when they thought no one was looking. Juno's small voice cut through the eulogy like a blade. "Daddy, who is that lady?" The church door had slammed open with a sound like a gunshot. Every head turned. The woman striding down the center aisle wore a navy suit tailored to intimidate platinum blonde hair. Cut sharp at the jaw, moving with the controlled aggression of someone who'd interrupted proceedings before and would do it again without hesitation. Diana Westbrook stopped 10 feet from the casket and pointed directly at Wyatt. Her voice carried the flat certainty of someone accustomed to legal confrontations. "I need to speak with the heir. Where is the will? I represent Ridgewood Estates Development Association, and we have interests related to the deceased property. 900 acres. We've been more than patient." The church went silent. Not the peaceful silence of mourning, but the sharp, uncomfortable silence of something deeply wrong unfolding in real time. Pastor Morrison stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, this is a funeral service. Whatever business you have can wait until after we've honored the deceased." Diana didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes stayed locked on Wyatt. "Mr. Mercer, I presume. We should talk soon. Your grandfather made decisions that affect significant investments, and we need to clarify the situation before things get complicated." The word complicated sounded less like a warning and more like a promise. She turned and walked back down the aisle without waiting for a response. Heels clicking against stone door slamming behind her with the same violence it had opened. Juno tugged at Wyatt's sleeve, her whisper loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "Why is she yelling at a funeral?" Wyatt pulled his daughter close, feeling the protective instinct rise hot in his chest. The one thing the divorce hadn't taken from him was this, the ability to shield her from ugliness, even when ugliness walked right through the church door and demanded answers to questions he didn't yet understand. The rest of the service blurred into background noise. Pastor Morrison finished the eulogy. People stood and said kind things about Buck that Wyatt barely registered. They sang a hymn his grandfather used to hum while working the fields back when Wyatt was 12 and spent summers learning what dirt and labor really meant. But his mind kept returning to Diana Westbrook, to her certainty, to the way she'd looked at him like he was an obstacle to be removed rather than a man burying his grandfather. After the service, Wyatt stepped outside into October sunlight that felt too bright and indifferent for grief. Across the parking lot, he spotted Ellis and Nadine standing near a black SUV. their backs to the church, gesturing with the kind of urgency that came from finalizing details rather than processing loss. Juno saw them first. Her observation carried the innocent clarity only children possess. "Daddy, why are they smiling? Aren't we supposed to be sad?" Then Diana Westbrook approached them. Wyatt watched the conversation unfold from 50 yards away. 2 minutes of talking, Ellis nodding slowly, deliberately, then extending his hand and Diana shaking it. Not a condolence handshake, a deal handshake. Nadine immediately pulled out her phone, typing something while glancing back toward the church toward Wyatt. A hand touched Wyatt's shoulder. He turned to find an elderly man in a brown suit, white hair neatly combed, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Wyatt Mercer?" Wyatt nodded. "Alistair Penn. I was your grandfather's attorney for 40 years. We need to talk, but not here." Alistair glanced toward the parking lot where Ellis was now on his phone, pacing. "You're the sole heir, 900 acres of agricultural land that your grandfather held since 1968. But you need to understand something." He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man who'd practiced law long enough to know which truths required gentle delivery. "That woman is Diana Westbrook. She's been pursuing this land for 3 years. 47 letters, 47 offers to buy. Your grandfather rejected every single one, wrote rejected in red ink on each envelope and sent them back. She stopped asking politely about a year ago." Alistair looked at Ellis and Nadine climbing into their rental car together. "And now that he's gone, she's already found people in your family willing to help her get what she wants." The next morning arrived with the kind of cold that made breath visible. Wyatt drove his rental car toward the farmhouse with Juno buckled in beside him. Her small backpack stuffed with the things she'd brought for what was supposed to be a 3-day trip: clothes, a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Ears, and a book about horses she'd been reading since August. They'd left Denver before dawn because Wyatt couldn't sleep anyway, and Juno had woken when she heard him moving in the kitchen. The farmhouse appeared at the end of a gravel road that stretched straight as a ruler between wheat fields that went on forever. Juno pressed her face to the window. "It's like a haunted house, but a good haunted house." The white siding had weathered to gray over decades of Colorado wind paint, peeling in long strips that curled away from the wood like dried skin. The wraparound porch sagged at the corners where boards had rotted through dark holes visible even from the driveway. 2 rocking chairs sat covered in moss and neglect, one missing a runner entirely. The smell hit them when Wyatt opened the car door: old wood dust diesel from the barn 50 yards away, and earth from 900 acres stretching beyond sight. Wyatt stood looking at the house and felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. 8 months since the divorce. 6 weeks since he'd lost his job at the software company in Denver, when the 3rd round of layoffs finally reached his department. 3 days since Vanessa's lawyer had called with barely concealed satisfaction to inform him that they'd be pursuing a modification of the custody arrangement based on his current living situation being unsuitable for a minor child. Juno grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the porch. "Come on, Daddy, let's explore." The front door opened with a groan that suggested decades of disuse. Inside, dust hung thick in the air, visible in the slanted morning light that came through windows so dirty they barely qualified as transparent. The kitchen table where Buck used to eat breakfast at 4:30 in the morning before heading to the fields sat in the same spot it had always occupied, now covered in mail that looked at least 6 months old. The living room window overlooked the eastern section, 800 acres of wheat that would need planting in the spring if anyone still cared about planting come spring. Juno moved through the rooms with the fearless curiosity of children who hadn't yet learned that some discoveries carried weight. "Daddy, look, there's a calendar on the wall." The John Deere calendar hung near the kitchen still turned to March, the month Buck had died. Wyatt's throat tightened looking at it. All the things his grandfather had meant to do and never finished frozen in time at the moment the heart simply stopped trying. He showed Juno the barn and the combine inside it, the 1985 model that had run the harvests when Wyatt was 12 and Buck had broken his arm during a bad fall from a ladder. Wyatt had driven it alone for 3 weeks straight that summer, waking at 4 in the morning and finishing after dark. Because the work didn't wait for convenient timing or childhood fears. Juno touched the controls with reverent fingers. You drove this when you were just a kid. I was scared, but sometimes you have to do hard things anyway. The words hung in the air between them like a prophecy neither of them recognized yet. They returned to the house and Wyatt started checking the foundation while Juno explored upstairs. The structural damage became apparent within minutes. 8 windows broken or cracked beyond repair. Porch joists rotted to the point of collapse. Roof leaking in at least 3 places based on the water stains visible on the ceiling. Kitchen plumbing shot the pipes corroded through decades of hard water and minimal maintenance. The barn door hung off one hinge, swaying in the wind like a drunk on Saturday night. Wyatt was calculating repair costs in his head when Juno's voice echoed down from the study. Daddy, there's a box under the desk. He found her kneeling on the floor with a wooden box open in front of her, letters spread out across the worn carpet. 47 envelopes, each bearing the Ridgewood Estates Development Association logo. Each one opened. Each one marked with the same word in red ink across the front, Buck's handwriting. Unmistakable even from across the room, rejected. Juno was sounding out the words slowly. R-E-J-E-C-T-E-D. What does that mean? It means great-grandpa said no. But they kept asking. Yeah, baby, they kept asking. Juno's wisdom arrived with the simple clarity of someone who'd been taught manners and assumed the rest of the world had too. That's not nice. When someone says no, you should stop. The offers escalated steadily across the envelopes. 18 million, 32 million, 41 million. With each rejection, the letters grew more insistent. The later ones included phrases like final opportunity and alternative arrangements may become necessary, the language carefully calibrated to suggest consequences without making explicit threats that could be used in court. Juno found the envelope without red ink at the bottom of the box, the postmark dated 2 weeks before Buck's death. Inside, the offer had reached $41 million, the highest yet. But attached to the standard offer letter was a handwritten note on personal stationery, not official letterhead. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, precise. Wyatt read it twice, then a third time to make sure he'd understood correctly. Mr. Mercer, I want you to know that I understand families. Estates of this size rarely stay intact after the original owner passes. Children disagree. Grandchildren have different priorities. Circumstances change. I'm not suggesting anything will happen to you, only observing that time moves forward for all of us. Would it not be wiser to make arrangements now on your terms rather than leave decisions to people who may not share your attachment to this particular piece of earth? I remain available whenever you're ready to have a realistic conversation. Diana Westbrook. Beneath her note, Buck had written his own response in pencil, though he'd apparently never sent it. They think money buys everything, but this land isn't mine to sell. It belongs to the ones who come after me, the ones who understand what it means. Juno looked up at Wyatt with eyes too serious for 9 years old. Daddy, are we the ones who come after? His voice came out rougher than he'd intended. Yeah, baby, we are. Then we have to understand what it means. Can you teach me? The question hit him harder than it should have. Here was his daughter asking him to teach her about legacy and responsibility and meaning when his own life had fallen apart in the span of 8 months. Divorce, job loss, custody threat. Living in a one-bedroom apartment with a fold-out couch and a refrigerator that contained mostly takeout containers and expired milk. But looking at her face, at the determination there, something shifted. This wasn't just about keeping land. This was about proving to himself that he could still teach her what mattered even when everything else had crumbled to ash. "Yeah, Juno, I can teach you." She threw her arms around his waist and held on tight enough that he felt it in his ribs. The next morning, Wyatt started making lists. Juno helped her handwriting careful and deliberate as she wrote down each repair. He called out 8 windows broken. Porch needs complete rebuild, roof leaking 3 places, kitchen plumbing shot, barn door off hinges, 1985 John Deere needs engine work. Juno studied the list when they finished. "That's a lot of work, Daddy." "Yeah, but we can do it one piece at a time." He taught her how to measure window frames that first week, how to hold the tape measure steady while he marked the wood with a carpenter's pencil. She wore one of Buck's old work shirts that dragged on the ground behind her like a cape. The sleeves rolled up 6 times and still hanging past her fingertips. Together they pulled out the first broken window, the glass coming free in jagged pieces that Wyatt carefully collected in a bucket so she wouldn't cut herself on the shards. The smell of fresh-cut lumber mixed with decades of accumulated dust. The sound of the hammer on nail made Juno flinch at first, the sharp crack of metal on metal startling in the quiet farmhouse. But by the 3rd nail she'd stopped jumping, and by the 10th, she was handing him supplies without being asked, anticipating what he'd need next. They installed the first window together on a Wednesday afternoon. Wyatt doing the heavy lifting while Juno held the frame steady, her small hands gripping the wood with determined concentration, tongue sticking out slightly, the way it did when she was focused on getting something exactly right. When the last nail went home and Wyatt stepped back to check the level, Juno clapped her hands. "We did it. We did. Tomorrow we do another one." It was Juno's idea to photograph the repairs. She'd seen a documentary once about a family that restored an old house, and they'd taken pictures to track their progress. So Wyatt started documenting each fix with his phone camera. Juno made labels in her careful handwriting, drawing little decorative borders around each one. Window number 1 broken to fixed. They taped the photos to the kitchen wall, creating a visual record of progress that grew day by day. The before and after wall, Juno called it. Evidence that hard work produced tangible results, that broken things could be made whole again, with enough patience and determination. By the 2nd week, they'd moved on to the porch. The foundation work required more skill than Wyatt possessed, and he was struggling with the proper technique for replacing rotted joists when a weathered Chevy pickup pulled into the driveway. The man who climbed out moved with military bearing, despite being at least 65, gray crew cut and scarred hands that had clearly spent decades doing real work. He walked to the porch like he owned the place. "You're doing it wrong." Wyatt straightened, defensive. "Excuse me. The joists. You're doing it wrong. Let me show you." The man extended his hand. "Flint Carswell. I own the section north of here. Buck and I were neighbors for 42 years. His handshake was firm, calloused palm rough against Wyatt's softer grip. Flint looked at the porch work, then at Juno, who was watching this stranger with open curiosity. "Your grandfather saved my farm in 2004. Developer tried the same tactics Diana's using now. Debt manipulation, family pressure, rezoning threats. I was a week from losing everything. Buck showed up with his attorney, his records, and a plan. He taught me how to fight smart instead of angry. Helped me document everything. We won." Flint crouched down to examine the foundation. "He called in that favor before he died. Asked me to watch out for you if things got bad." Over the next week, Flint taught them proper carpentry technique, how to pre-drill holes to prevent wood from splitting, how to use a level correctly, watching for the bubble to settle exactly in the center, how to measure twice and cut once because lumber cost money and mistakes cost more. Juno absorbed everything with the intense focus of children who hadn't yet learned that learning could be boring. She asked questions constantly. "Mr. Flint, why do we put the boards this way?" "Because that's how your great-grandpa taught me, and now I'm teaching you." The intergenerational transfer of knowledge happened without ceremony or acknowledgement, skills passing from one set of hands to another in the same way they'd been passed for generations before. Practical wisdom that couldn't be learned from books or YouTube videos. The sensory environment of the farmhouse shifted as the repairs progressed. In the broken areas, dust remained thick on every surface, Juno's fingers leaving trails when she touched the furniture. Floorboards groaned with every step, some cracking under weight they were no longer structured to bear. Wallpaper peeled away from the walls, revealing 4 different layers underneath like archaeological strata. The smell of mildew lingered in the back bedrooms where water had seeped through the damaged roof for years. But in the repaired spaces, fresh pine scent filled the air from new lumber. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, and Juno danced in the beams when she thought no one was watching. The floor felt solid underfoot, no more creaking or sagging. The smell of paint and Murphy's oil soap replaced decay with the sharp, clean odor of renewal. Juno's laughter echoed in the cleaned spaces, filling rooms that had been silent for too long with the sound of life continuing. They were finishing the kitchen renovation in week 5 when Ellis and Nadine arrived unannounced at 7 in the evening. They let themselves in without knocking, walking through the door like they had a right to be there. Wyatt and Juno were covered in sawdust from ripping out the old cabinets, the kitchen stripped down to studs and subfloor mid-transformation between what it had been and what it would become. Ellis looked around with an appraising eye, already calculating coal. "Wyatt." "Right, Wyatt. We need to talk about the land. I know Dad left everything to you, but that doesn't seem fair, does it? 900 acres worth over $40 million. You're going to keep that all to yourself while your own family struggles." Wyatt set down the pry bar he'd been using and stood slowly. "You haven't visited Grandpa in 12 years, Uncle Ellis. You didn't call him on his birthday. You didn't come when he had pneumonia in 2019. And now you want to talk about fairness." Nadine walked in from inspecting the rest of the house, arms crossed. "The past is the past, Wyatt. What matters now is the future. That development woman Diana explained the situation to us. The land is worth more developed than sitting here growing wheat. 41 million split among the family would change all our lives." Juno stepped forward, her voice clear despite being 9 years old and covered in sawdust. "We're fixing Great-Grandpa's house. We're working really hard." Nadine's smile was patronizing. "Sweetie, wouldn't you rather live with your mommy in her nice, clean house?" Juno's response came fierce and immediate. "I want to stay with Daddy and finish fixing Great-Grandpa's house." Wyatt put himself between them and his daughter. "Get out." Ellis's face went red. "You're making a mistake. Diana has resources, relationships with county officials. If you don't cooperate, this process will become much more complicated than it needs to be. And don't think Sarah's lawyer won't hear about this. Living in a broken-down farmhouse, no income, dragging your daughter into manual labor. Dragging her. She's learning what it means to work for something. To build something that matters. When's the last time you built anything, Marcus?" Ellis opened his mouth, closed it, then stormed out with Nadine following close behind. Neither of them said goodbye. After they left, Wyatt stood in the gutted kitchen, breathing hard, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and rage. Through the window, he watched their rental car disappear down the gravel road, dust rising in their wake. That night, after Juno had finally fallen asleep upstairs in the room they'd managed to clean and paint, Wyatt's laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line made his stomach drop. Modification of custody arrangement. He opened it and read the legal language with growing dread. Vanessa's attorney was filing a motion to modify the custody agreement based on unsafe living conditions, financial instability, and an inappropriate environment for a minor child. The hearing was scheduled in 90 days, 3 months to prove he could provide a stable home, or lose Juno permanently. The second email arrived 10 minutes later, this one from his bank. A formal notice that his outstanding balance of $185,000 medical ICU expenses for Silas Mercer incurred in March of the previous year had been transferred to a new creditor effective immediately. All future payments should be directed to Ridgewood Holdings, LLC. Wyatt read the notice 3 times, each reading more painful than the last. The debt he'd taken out to save Buck's life when his grandfather had refused to sell land to pay hospital bills. $185,000 with 90 days to pay in full or face property lien against the 900 acres listed as collateral. Diana Westbrook had bought his debt. She now controlled his financial survival. He pulled out a piece of paper and did the math that would haunt him for the next 3 months. Savings $23,000, debt due $185,000, shortfall $162,000, days until custody hearing 90, days until debt due 90, days until Diana's exclusivity window with Crestview closed 60. 3 countdowns running simultaneously, all designed to suffocate him into surrender before he could catch his breath. Wyatt created a chart on the kitchen wall, the numbers written in his careful handwriting where he'd see them every morning. 90 days until debt due equals lose land. 90 days until custody hearing equals lose Juno. 60 days until Diana's deadline. Savings $23,000, debt $185,000, shortfall $162,000. He was staring at the numbers when Juno appeared in the doorway. Mr. Ears clutched under one arm, eyes heavy with interrupted sleep. "Daddy, why are the numbers the same?" "What do you mean? Both 90 days. The bad lady knew about the court thing with Mommy, didn't she?" The realization hit him like cold water. Diana hadn't just bought the debt opportunistically. She'd bought it strategically, timing the transfer to coincide with the custody battle. Maximum pressure at exactly the same moment, attacking him as both a father and a landowner simultaneously. Juno studied his face with the perceptiveness children sometimes possess when adults forget to hide their fear. "Daddy, are you going to give up?" Wyatt looked at his daughter at the farmhouse they'd started repairing, at Buck's letter still sitting on the kitchen table where he'd left it after reading it for the 10th time. The weight doesn't get lighter, you get stronger. He knelt down to Juno's level and took her smooth hands in his. "Listen to me. We are not giving up. We are going to fix this house. We are going to keep this land, and we are going to stay together. Do you believe me?" "I believe you. But Daddy, how?" "The same way we fix those windows, one piece at a time." 3 days later, Alistair Penn called with news that would change the trajectory of everything. "It's time to open Buck's safety deposit box. Meet me at First National Bank of Ridgeway, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning." Wyatt brought Juno with him because leaving her alone at the farmhouse felt wrong somehow, like he needed her present for whatever discoveries waited in that metal box. They arrived to find Alistair waiting in the lobby with a bank officer who led them to a private viewing room in the basement. The box was larger than expected, a long metal container that required 2 keys to open. Alistair had one, the bank officer the other. When the lid came up, Wyatt saw the contents laid out like pieces of a puzzle he didn't yet know how to assemble. A sealed envelope, a USB drive, a leather-bound notebook he didn't recognize, and something that made his breath catch, a small metal badge in a clear protective case. FBI Witness Protection Program, dated 1994. Juno saw it first. Was great-grandpa a police officer? Alistair's voice carried weight when he answered. Something like that. He was very brave. The attorney connected the USB drive to a laptop he'd brought specifically for this purpose. Buck's face appeared on the screen exactly as Wyatt remembered him. White hair combed back neatly, sharp blue eyes, sitting in the living room of the farmhouse with afternoon light coming through the window behind him. He wore his usual work shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands folded on the table in front of him. Buck's voice was clear and steady. I, Silas Mercer, 82 years old, am recording this video to accompany my last will and testament. I am of sound mind, making these decisions freely without pressure from anyone. For the next 45 minutes, Buck walked through every provision of the will with perfect clarity. His memory was flawless, his logic precise. No confusion, no hesitation, no sign of the diminished capacity that Diana's lawyers would inevitably claim in their probate challenge. But it was what he said near the end that made Wyatt's throat tighten, and Juno's eyes well with tears she didn't quite understand. Buck leaned forward slightly, speaking to someone specific rather than a camera. Wyatt, if you're watching this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain in person. I'm sorry for that. I chose you because you're the only one who understood what this land means. You worked it, you bled for it. You came back summer after summer when no one asked you to, because something in you recognized that this dirt isn't just dirt. It's memory. It's labor. It's everything our family built and everything that will outlast us. Juno whispered, He was talking about you, Daddy. Wyatt couldn't speak. He just nodded and pulled her close. Buck continued, I've heard conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. I know some people in my family have different ideas about what should happen to this property. I have my suspicions about what arrangements have been made, but I trust you to do what's right. Then Buck straightened in his chair and his tone shifted, becoming more formal. There's something you need to know. In 1994, I was a witness for the FBI against a land development syndicate operating in Colorado. They were using fraud, intimidation, and violence to force farmers off land for commercial development. I testified. 3 men went to federal prison based largely on my evidence. The organization collapsed. But some people hold grudges for 30 years. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Juno looked up at Wyatt with questions in her eyes, but he just shook his head slightly, gesturing for her to keep watching. Buck's final words carried the weight of prophecy. I've kept records of the contacts I've received over the past 3 years, the letters, the incidents on the property. I tracked who was on my land without permission, when and why. Alistair has copies of everything. They may be useful, they may not. I'm not a lawyer, I just know that documentation matters. The truth doesn't always win, I've lived long enough to know that, but it deserves a fighting chance, that's all I can give you. The video ended. The room fell silent except for the laptop's cooling fan. Alistair handed Wyatt the sealed envelope. He asked me to give you this separately. Wyatt's hands shook as he opened it. Buck's handwriting filled a single page. Wyatt, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're probably scared. That's okay. I was scared too when my father left me this land. 900 acres felt like a weight I couldn't carry. But I learned something over 56 years of carrying it. The weight doesn't get lighter. You get stronger. They'll tell you that selling is the smart choice. They'll offer you numbers that sound like freedom. But freedom built on betrayal is just another kind of prison. This land isn't mine to sell. It never was. It belongs to the ones who come after the ones who understand that some things can't be measured in dollars. I chose you because you're that person. Don't let them take what I'm trusting you to protect, and when it gets hard, remember that I'm proud of you. I always was. One more thing. If Diana threatens you directly, if she crosses certain lines, open the red notebook I left in the box. Flint knows what to do with what's inside. He's been waiting for my signal. Consider this it. Love, Grandpa Buck. Juno read over his shoulder, her voice small. What does the weight doesn't get lighter mean? Wyatt's voice came out rough. It means hard things stay hard, but you get better at carrying them. Juno thought about this for a moment. Like when I carry the toolbox for you. It's still heavy, but I'm getting stronger. Exactly like that. Alistair handed him the leather-bound notebook. Inside were 3 years of meticulous documentation. Dates. Descriptions of contacts. Notes about vehicles parked outside the property without permission. Observations about surveyors who'd entered the land without authorization. License plate numbers. Photographs taped to pages. A complete timeline of Diana's escalating tactics. Names of Crestview employees involved. Financial transactions Buck had traced between Diana and Ellis, and Nadine payment records that proved the family betrayal had begun while Buck was still alive. Alistair's voice was careful. Combined with the video, this makes their probate challenge extremely difficult to sustain. But Wyatt evidence wins court cases. It doesn't necessarily win everything else. Diana's not stupid. When she sees this video, she'll know her legal challenge is dead. But legal challenges aren't her only option. Rezoning decisions are made by elected officials responding to public pressure, economic arguments, political influence. Truth matters in a courtroom. In a county board hearing, it competes with 100 other factors. His phone rang. He listened for 30 seconds, his face tightening with each passing moment. When he hung up, he looked at Wyatt with the expression of a man delivering bad news he'd hoped to avoid. Diana just filed a motion with the county board requesting an emergency public hearing on the rezoning proposal. She's claiming the Mercer property is being deliberately neglected, causing economic harm to the surrounding community. She wants the board to expedite approval. Wyatt's stomach tightened. When is the hearing? 10 days. The timeline crystallized in Wyatt's mind with brutal clarity. Diana's exclusivity window was closing. Her probate challenge wouldn't survive the video evidence, so she was pivoting to the one battlefield where truth competed with money and political influence instead of simply overwhelming it. A public hearing where 5 county commissioners would decide whether 900 acres of agricultural land should be rezoned for residential development. Where Diana could present economic arguments, job creation projections, tax revenue forecasts. Where Wyatt would have 3 minutes to explain why preserving his grandfather's legacy mattered more than $41 million and 500 construction jobs. Juno tugged at his sleeve. Daddy, what does that mean? Wyatt looked at his daughter, at the attorney who'd served his grandfather for 4 decades, at the notebook full of evidence and the USB drive containing Buck's final testimony. He thought about the farmhouse they'd been repairing, one window at a time, the before and after wall in the kitchen that tracked their progress, the promise he'd made to Juno that they wouldn't give up no matter how hard things got. It means we have 10 days to get ready for the fight of our lives. The restoration work intensified during week 3 with a precision that bordered on obsession. Wyatt and Juno fell into a rhythm that began before sunrise and ended long after dark. Each day measured in tangible progress rather than abstract hope. The porch rebuild required skills Wyatt didn't possess but learned through trial and Flint's patient instruction, the older man appearing most mornings with coffee in a thermos and corrections delivered without judgment. Juno learned to use the level with meticulous care, watching the bubbles settle exactly center before announcing success. Her tongue still protruded slightly when she concentrated a tell. Wyatt had learned to recognize as the precursor to her asking the kind of question that would require an honest answer he might not want to give. They replaced rotted joists one by one, Juno holding boards steady while Wyatt drove nails with rhythmic precision that came from repetition rather than natural talent. The smell of fresh pine saturated the air, mixing with sawdust that coated their skin and clothes until they both looked like they'd been dipped in pale powder. Juno wore Buck's work shirt every day now, the fabric soft from decades of washing, the sleeves still rolled up 6 times despite her insistence that she was growing taller. Wyatt caught himself watching her sand rough edges with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that quality mattered more than speed, and something in his chest tightened at the realization that she was learning values he'd almost forgotten he possessed. By Thursday of week 3, they'd completed the porch foundation. Juno insisted on the photograph ritual before they moved forward, documenting the transformation from collapse to stability. She labeled the image in her precise handwriting, "Porch foundation holes you could fall through to strong enough for anything." The exclamation point was larger than the other letters, her enthusiasm bleeding through in the extra pressure she'd applied to the pen. Week 4 brought them to the barn and the John Deere that had sat silent since Buck's death. Flint arrived with tools Wyatt didn't recognize and a patience that suggested he'd taught difficult lessons before. He showed them how to drain old oil that came out thick and black, the smell making Juno wrinkle her nose in disgust. Together they removed rusted bolts using leverage techniques that Flint explained with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone who'd learned these skills in contexts where failure meant more than inconvenience. Juno's role evolved from observer to participant to essential team member. She cleaned engine parts with solvent while wearing gloves 3 sizes too large, her small hands working with concentration that made her look older than 9. When Flint explained how a carburetor mixed air and fuel, she giggled at the word itself. That's silly. But remembered the function perfectly when he quizzed her later. The moment the engine turned over and roared to life, Juno jumped up and down with abandon that came from genuine accomplishment rather than participation trophy achievement. Wyatt stood in the barn covered in grease and felt something shift in his understanding of what they were doing here. This wasn't just fixing equipment. This was fixing themselves one mechanical problem at a time, proving capability through concrete results that couldn't be argued or dismissed. Week 5 brought kitchen demolition and reconstruction. Wyatt and Juno ripped out the rusted sink and broken cabinets, revealing newspapers from 1974 that had been used as shelf liners. They stopped work to read about President Nixon's resignation, Juno asking questions that required Wyatt to remember high school history lessons he'd thought forgotten. The act of installing a new sink together, Juno measuring Wyatt, cutting both of them, wrestling the heavy porcelain into position, carried weight beyond plumbing repair. When they turned on the water for the first time and it flowed clean and cold from the faucet, Juno put her hands under the stream and laughed with delight that seemed disproportionate to the achievement. Until Wyatt realized it wasn't about water. It was about transformation. About broken things made whole through effort and patience. They ate dinner that night at Buck's refinished table in the kitchen they'd rebuilt together. Spaghetti from a box. Nothing fancy, but Juno declared it better than restaurant food with the conviction of someone who'd earned the right to judge. The attacks began during week 6 with the stealth of poison introduced gradually into a water supply. Anonymous posts appeared on Ridgeway community forums questioning why a young man from Denver was blocking development that would bring 500 DU to the county. The comments called Wyatt selfish and indifferent to working families, an outsider who cared more about empty fields than economic opportunity. Wyatt tried to ignore the digital harassment, but the poison spread faster than he'd anticipated. Someone sent an email to his former employer's general HR inbox claiming he was involved in contentious legal disputes demonstrating poor judgment and potential ethical concerns. The message didn't make specific accusations, just enough insinuation to create doubt. His old supervisor called to inform him that while the company wasn't taking action, perhaps Wyatt should resolve his personal situation quickly. The translation was clear: distance yourself from this mess, or accept that your professional reputation is collateral damage. Juno encountered the real-world manifestation of the campaign on her third day at Ridgeway Elementary. Wyatt had enrolled her to establish residency, and because keeping her isolated at the farmhouse felt wrong somehow, like he was protecting her from lessons she needed to learn about how the world actually worked. She came home that afternoon with red eyes and a story about kids repeating things their parents had said, accusations about her dad being the reason their dads couldn't get joy. Wyatt's rage rose hot and immediate, the protective instinct that parenthood had sharpened to a weapon. What exactly did they say? Juno's voice was smooth: that you're selfish, that you only care about yourself, that their families need money and you won't let them have it. And what did you tell them? Her chin lifted with defiance that reminded him of Buck. I told them my daddy isn't selfish. He's teaching me how to build things. How many of their daddies know how to fix a tractor? Pride and worry warred in Wyatt's chest. The school had called about a verbal altercation, expecting him to discipline his daughter for standing up to bullies with truth as her only weapon. Instead, he knelt to her level and took her hands. I'm proud of you for defending what's right. But fighting isn't the answer. She looked at him with the kind of clarity children sometimes possess before the world teaches them to compromise. But Daddy, you're fighting for the farm. That's different. I'm fighting with truth, not fists. Then I'll fight with truth too. The financial countdown continued its relentless march toward zero. Day 30 brought their savings from $23,000 to $19,500, living expenses and materials consuming resources faster than Wyatt could track. Day 45 saw them down to $14,200. Juno noticed the numbers changing on the kitchen wall chart and asked the question Wyatt had been dreading. Daddy, why do the numbers keep going down? He gave her the truth because lying to her felt worse than facing hard realities together. Because money goes out faster than it comes in when you're building something. She studied the chart with the seriousness of someone trying to understand economics beyond her years. But the farm is getting better. That's worth money, right? Yeah, baby, in the long run. Then we're investing, like you taught me. The word hung between them like a promise neither of them could guarantee would pay off. Vanessa arrived during week 7 with her new husband Brad, appearing without warning in a luxury SUV that looked obscene against the backdrop of agricultural poverty they'd been living in for 6 weeks. Wyatt watched them pull up and felt his stomach tighten with anticipation of conflict he couldn't avoid. Juno ran out from the barn covered in sawdust from helping Flint rebuild the loft ladder, her excitement at seeing her mother genuine despite everything. Mommy. Vanessa's expression shifted from anticipation to horror in the space of a heartbeat. Look at you. You're filthy. Juno's pride was obvious. I helped Daddy fix the combine. It runs now. Brad stepped out of the SUV wearing clothes that cost more than Wyatt had spent on materials for the entire porch rebuild. His assessment of the farmhouse took approximately 3 seconds before judgment settled across his features like a mask. This is where you're living with our daughter. Vanessa's voice carried the particular tone she used when she'd already made a decision and was simply going through the motions of appearing reasonable. Cole. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're living in a construction site with a child. How is this appropriate? Wyatt felt the old name slip past him without correction because bigger battles demanded his energy. She's learning real skills. She's learning what hard work means. She's learning that some things matter more than comfort. Brad's laugh was dismissive. Be realistic. You can't afford to finish these repairs. Sell the land, split the money, get a condo in Denver where your daughter can have a normal childhood. This isn't about money. Everything is about money. Juno stepped between them with the kind of courage that came from not yet understanding how power worked. No, it's not. It's about great-grandpa and legacy and not giving up. Brad looked down at her with the condescension adults sometimes show children they consider naive. Honey, you don't understand. I understand you're mean. Vanessa pulled Wyatt aside while Brad fumed in silence. Her voice dropping to the register she used for delivering ultimatums. I'm giving you one chance. Sell the farm, use the money to prove you can provide stable housing, or I will take Emma. Wyatt kept his voice level through force of will. She's happy here. She's 9. She doesn't know what's good for her. She knows this place matters. She knows hard work matters. She knows her father keeps his promises. The court will side with me. I have a real house, a real income, a real life. And I have something you'll never understand. A purpose. They left in the luxury SUV dust, rising behind them like a judgment already rendered. Wyatt stood watching until they disappeared, then turned to find Juno standing on the porch, with tears tracking clean lines through the sawdust on her face. That night she couldn't sleep. He found her in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, Mr. Ears clutched tight, fear making her look younger than 9. Daddy, can they really make me leave? Honesty felt cruel but necessary. They're going to try. But I don't want to go. Mommy's house is nice, but it's not home. What's home to you? She thought about it with the deliberation of someone who understood the weight words could carry. Home is where we're building something together. The simple truth cut through every legal argument Vanessa's lawyer could construct. But Wyatt knew that truth and victory were different things. He pulled Juno close and made a promise he wasn't certain he could keep. Then that's what we'll fight for. Week 8 brought strategic planning sessions with Flint. That happened after Juno went to bed, the two men sitting at Buck's table with maps and documents spread between them like battle plans. Flint's military background showed in the way he approached the problem, breaking it into tactical components rather than treating it as a single overwhelming threat. He used chess as a teaching metaphor, the pieces moving across a board Juno had abandoned earlier in the evening. Diana isn't playing checkers, she's playing chess. You need to think 3 moves ahead. Wyatt studied the board, exhaustion making it hard to think clearly. What's our queen? The truth. And you've got plenty of it. Buck's video, the notebook, the debt manipulation, the campaign contributions, but truth is only powerful if you present it at the right moment to the right audience. They built a coalition over the following days, reaching out to farmers who remembered Buck's integrity and resented Diana's tactics. The Colorado Farm Bureau agreed to send a representative to the hearing. Dr. Garrett Hughes from the Ridgeway Land Trust reviewed their documentation and cautiously agreed to consider expert testimony, though his commitment remained conditional on his review of the evidence. The community support manifested most clearly during the barn roof raising that happened on Saturday of week 8. 15 neighbors showed up with ladders and tools and food, the old farming tradition of collective labor still alive in rural Colorado, when someone needed help and had earned it. Juno and a farmer's grandson served lemonade to workers while music played from a radio someone had brought, the sound of hammers and scissors mixing with laughter that felt almost normal. By sunset, they'd installed a new roof that would last another 20 years. Juno watched the final shingles go on and turned to Wyatt with understanding dawning across her features. This is what great-grandpa meant by community right. Yeah, baby, exactly that. The discovery of Opal Hutchins' recording happened almost by accident on Sunday afternoon. Juno was at Opal's house while Wyatt met with Alistair about hearing preparation, and her curiosity led her to explore the garage where Opal stored decades of accumulated possessions in boxes labeled by year. She found the filing cabinet in a corner behind old Christmas decorations drawers labeled with date ranges that went back to the 1980s. The drawer marked 1994 to 1999, opened with a creak of long unused hinges. Inside, Juno found folders organized by year and subject, Opal's handwriting precise on each label. The cassette tape sat in a folder marked Property Disputes 2022. The plastic case labeled in pen Diana Westbrook, Threats, May 15th. Juno brought it to Opal with the innocent directness of someone who hadn't yet learned that some discoveries carried consequences. "What's this?" Opal's face went pale when she saw it, memory clearly returning in a rush. "That's something I'd forgotten I had." They found an old cassette player in Opal's basement, and when she pressed play, Diana's voice filled the room with the particular tone of someone making threats they believed couldn't be recorded or traced. The conversation was with a man named Patterson, an elderly landowner Diana had been pressuring 3 years earlier. His voice shook with age and fear, but Diana's remained steady and cold. "Mr. Patterson, you're being unreasonable. I've made you a generous offer. If you continue to refuse, I can't guarantee what might happen." Patterson's response came weak and uncertain. "Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. Properties like yours have a way of becoming problematic when owners don't cooperate. Permit issues, tax complications, sometimes equipment failures, sometimes worse. Much easier to accept my offer and avoid all that unpleasantness. I'm calling my attorney." "By all means, but attorneys are expensive, and problems can be expensive. Much simpler to work with me." The recording ended. Opal's voice was quiet. "Mr. Patterson sold his farm 6 weeks after I recorded this. He died 8 months later. Heart attack. He was 79. Juno looked up at Wyatt with the kind of clarity that came from hearing evil speak plainly. "Daddy, that's illegal, right?" Flint had arrived during the playback, his expression grim. "Very illegal, sweetheart. It's called extortion." Wyatt felt something shift in his understanding of what they were fighting. This wasn't just about one property or one family. This was about a pattern of predation that had destroyed others before him and would continue destroying people after if no one stopped it. Juno's small voice cut through his thoughts. "I found the evidence that could end this, didn't I?" Flint crouched down to her level. "You know what you are, Juno. You're a detective, just like your great-grandpa." Pride transformed her features. "We're a team, Daddy. Teams save each other." The physical attack came 48 hours before the hearing, arriving with the kind of violence that left no room for misinterpretation about Diana's desperation. Wyatt woke at 2:30 in the morning to the sound of breaking glass, multiple windows shattering simultaneously in a coordinated assault that couldn't be accidental. The sound was distinct and terrible, each crash followed by the tinkle of falling shards. Juno's scream from her room drove him into motion before conscious thought engaged. He ran to her door and found her sitting up in bed, clutching Mr. Ear's, eyes wide with terror. "Daddy, what's happening?" "Stay in your room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you." "I'm scared." "I know, baby, but you're brave. Remember." Flint appeared in the hallway, already moving, his military training evident in the economy of motion and the focused awareness that comes from being woken to crisis more times than most people experience in a lifetime. His voice was low and controlled. 3 men, Barn, I'm going out back. What about? Protect Juno. I'll handle them. Outside, the sound of the John Deere engine starting cut through the night. Someone was in the cab, the diesel rumble unmistakable even from inside the house. Wyatt reached the window in time to see the combine moving deliberately toward the irrigation system they'd spent a week repairing, the operator's intent clear and malicious. Flint emerged from the back door at a run. His shout carried authority that expected obedience. "Stop the combine!" Three figures materialized from shadows near the barn, moving to intercept. Wyatt didn't think, just moved, running toward the door and outside into cold air that bit exposed skin. He saw Flint reach the first man and execute an arm lock that came from decades of practice muscle memory, overriding the limitations of age through pure technique. The second man tackled Wyatt from the side, hitting him hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. They went down together on frozen ground, the impact sending pain shooting through Wyatt's ribs. The man was younger and stronger, his weight pressing down with professional efficiency that suggested this wasn't his first assault. The sound of sirens cut through the night, distant but approaching. Juno's voice screamed from an upstairs window. "Help is coming, I called 911. The third man abandoned the combine and all three retreated to an unmarked van parked beyond the barn. Wyatt caught a glimpse of the license plate, but it was covered with mud or paint, deliberately obscured. The van tore out of the driveway with the kind of reckless speed that came from knowing pursuit wasn't coming. Flint helped Wyatt to his feet, checking for serious injury with practiced efficiency. "Ribs just bruised, not broken. You're lucky." The sheriff arrived 6 minutes after Juno's call, followed by an ambulance she'd also requested, with the kind of thorough thinking that came from paying attention when Wyatt had drilled emergency procedures into her. She ran out of the house and threw herself at him hard enough to hurt his ribs worse, her small body shaking with fear and adrenaline. Wyatt held her and repeated the only truth that mattered. "I'm okay, baby, I'm okay. I called 911 like you taught me. You did perfect." Morning light revealed the extent of the damage. 8 windows broken, the same ones they'd replaced during weeks 2 and 3, destroyed again with deliberate cruelty. The irrigation pipes showed fresh damage where the combine had been driven over them before Flint stopped the attack. The barn door hung off its hinges again, ripped away by someone who'd known exactly which structural points to target. Juno stood looking at the destruction with tears running down her face, her before and after photographs rendered obsolete by violence. "They broke our work." Wyatt knelt beside her despite the pain in his ribs. "We'll fix it again, but we don't have time. The hearing is in 2 days. Then we'll go to the hearing with broken windows and we'll show them what people who want to destroy things look like versus people who want to build." She processed this for a long moment, then wiped her eyes with determination that made her look older than 9. "Can we take a picture?" "Why?" "Because this goes on the wall too. It's not a before and after. It's just broken. But it's proof of what we're fighting against." Wyatt photographed the damage with Juno in the foreground, her face showing sadness but not defeat. When they printed it and added it to the kitchen wall, she labeled it carefully. "Windows number 18, broken again, the day before we fight." Diana's phone call came that evening while Wyatt was boarding up the broken windows with plywood that would have to suffice until after the hearing. Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before, desperation bleeding through the professional veneer. "I had nothing to do with last night. But you know about it." A pause that confirmed everything. "People are impatient. They want results." "Who are they, Diana?" Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, the mask had slipped completely. "At tomorrow's hearing, I will present documentation about your grandfather's FBI past, the testimony against the land syndicate, the witness protection, I'll make sure everyone in that room knows Silas Mercer was an informant who sent men to prison to protect his own interests. Wyatt's blood ran cold. That's defamation. Truth isn't defamation. And by the time I'm done, this community will understand what kind of family they're protecting. Your grandfather destroyed lives, he betrayed people, and you're carrying on his legacy of selfishness. The threat crystallized. You're going to destroy his reputation. I'm going to destroy your case. No one will want to protect land owned by someone who profited from betrayal. The board will approve the rezoning just to be rid of anything connected to the Mercer name. Wyatt's hand tightened on the phone. This conversation is being recorded. Colorado is a one-party consent state. The silence that followed stretched long enough for him to hear her breathing change, realization dawning. You just threatened to commit defamation using false statements about a deceased man who can't defend himself. And you admitted knowledge of people who committed assault on my property. Diana's voice cracked. You don't understand what you're interfering with. I have obligations, contractual obligations. If this deal falls through... She caught herself, but too late. If this deal falls through, what, you lose your commission or something worse? She hung up without answering. Flint had listened to the entire conversation, his expression grim. She just gave us everything. Admission of knowledge about the attack, threat to defame Buck, admission of being under duress from contractual obligations she can't fulfill. Someone above her is applying pressure, and she's willing to cross any line to deliver, which makes her more dangerous than I thought. That night, Juno came downstairs long after she should have been asleep, finding Wyatt at the kitchen table reviewing the evidence they'd assembled. She climbed into his lap despite being almost too big for it. Mr. Ears clutched under one arm. Daddy, what did she say about great-grandpa? There was no point in lying to her. She'd hear it at the hearing if Diana followed through on her threat. She's going to try to make people think he was a bad person, that he hurt people to protect himself. But that's not true. He helped catch bad people. You said so. I know, baby, but sometimes lies are louder than truth. She was quiet for a long moment, processing this in the way children do when they're learning that the world doesn't always work the way it should. Then we'll be louder than the lies. Wyatt pulled her close and felt the weight of everything they were about to walk into. 48 hours until the hearing. Broken windows and damaged property. A daughter who'd seen violence and made emergency calls and discovered evidence that could change everything. An uncle who'd betrayed them for money. An ex-wife trying to take custody. A developer willing to destroy reputations to close a deal. And 900 acres of land that meant more than any of it because it represented something that couldn't be bought or broken or taken by force. The weight doesn't get lighter. You get stronger. Tomorrow they would walk into that hearing room with truth as their only weapon and hope it was enough. Dawn arrived cold and merciless on the morning of the hearing. Wyatt woke at 4:30 to find Juno already dressed, sitting on the edge of her bed with Mr. Ears in her lap and an expression that suggested she'd been awake for hours. The plywood covering the broken windows blocked most of the light, creating shadows that made the farmhouse feel smaller than it was. She followed him downstairs without speaking. Her usual morning chatter replaced by a tension that radiated from her small frame like heat from a stove. He started coffee and watched her trace patterns on the kitchen table with one finger. The same table where they'd eaten dozens of meals over the past 9 weeks, where they'd planned repairs and celebrated small victories and learned that building something together meant more than the sum of materials and labor. Her voice emerged quiet and determined. Daddy, can we fix one window before we go? He'd planned to leave by 7 to arrive early to secure good seats to have time to settle his nerves before walking into a room designed to intimidate people who weren't accustomed to formal proceedings. Replacing a window would take at least an hour, maybe more, and they couldn't afford to be late. "Baby, we don't have time. Please, just one, so we can show them we didn't quit." The logic was 9-year-old simple and completely sound. Wyatt looked at his daughter and saw Buck in her eyes, the same stubborn refusal to let circumstances dictate actions. The same understanding that symbols mattered as much as strategy. "Okay, one window." They worked in the pre-dawn darkness using the Coleman lantern that Flint had left after the attack. Its white light harsh and unforgiving, but sufficient for the task. Juno held the frame with both hands while Wyatt positioned it, her grip steady despite the cold making her fingers clumsy. They'd done this enough times now that words weren't necessary, each of them knowing their role, the rhythm of the work familiar as breathing. The last nail went home with a solid thunk that echoed in the quiet morning. They stepped back and examined their work, the new glass catching lantern light and throwing it back at them like a small victory against darkness that wanted to swallow everything. Juno pulled out her phone and took the photographs before and after, though the before had been taken 2 days ago when the window was still whole, and the after showed only that they'd refused to accept destruction as final. She labeled it in her notebook with careful precision. "Window number 9. Broken again to fixed again. The day we fight." Wyatt watched her add it to the collection of photographs she'd compiled over 9 weeks, documentation of transformation that had become a kind of scripture she could point to when doubt crept in. The evidence that hard work produced results, that broken things could be made whole, that refusing to surrender mattered even when the odds seemed calculated to guarantee failure. Why was this one so important? She looked up at him with an expression older than her years. "Because Great-Grandpa wrote that the weight doesn't get lighter, you get stronger. Every time we fix something, we prove we're getting stronger. And today we need to be the strongest we've ever been." They dressed in the clothes they'd set aside for this purpose. Juno in a dress she'd picked herself, navy blue with small white flowers. Practical rather than fancy, because she'd insisted on something that didn't make her look like she was playing dress-up. Wyatt in the suit he'd worn to Buck's funeral, the fabric still carrying a faint smell of the church lilies and old wood. The drive to Ridgeway took 40 minutes through country that looked different in morning light. The wheat fields stretching golden toward mountains that seemed close enough to touch, but never got closer no matter how far you drove. Juno was quiet for most of the journey, clutching the folder containing her before and after photographs like they were sacred texts. Halfway there, she broke the silence with a question that cut straight to the fear he'd been avoiding. "Daddy, what happens if we lose?" Honesty felt brutal but necessary. "Then we'll have 90 days to figure out how to pay a debt we can't afford, and your mom will probably get full custody. And the farm goes to whoever Diana sells it to." She processed this information with the gravity it deserved, her small face working through scenarios that no 9-year-old should have to contemplate. "So we have to win." "Yeah, baby, we have to win." The Weld County Administration Building parking lot was already filling when they arrived at 8:30. Approximately 70 people milled outside the entrance, most wearing Crestview polo shirts in coordinated blue, carrying professionally printed signs that shouted messages designed to make Wyatt feel like the enemy. 500 jobs versus 1 farm, and progress over obstruction, and build our future. Juno saw them and her hand tightened in his. They have a lot of people. On the opposite side of the entrance, a smaller group had assembled. Maybe 15 farmers in work clothes, faces weathered by decades of sun and wind, holding handmade signs that spoke to different values: protect family farms and land legacy matters. Opal Hutchins stood among them, looking fierce despite being 70 years old, her sign reading simply, "Buck Mercer kept faith, his family will too." Flint waited near the doors, his presence solid and reassuring. When he saw Juno, he crouched down to her level. "You ready for this?" She nodded with more conviction than Wyatt felt. "We fixed a window this morning so they'd know we didn't give up." "That's my girl. Remember, you're a detective. Detectives find truth, and truth is what we're bringing today." Inside, the hearing room held 150 seats, and everyone was filled by 9 o'clock. Wyatt and Juno found spots in the third row with Alistair on one side and Flint on the other, a small fortress of support in a room that felt hostile to their presence. The 5 county commissioners sat behind a raised wooden platform that gave them literal and symbolic height advantage over everyone who would speak. Chairman Robert Fletcher occupied the center position, his face carrying the particular expression of someone who'd already made a decision and was simply going through required procedural motions. Commissioner Daniel Holt sat to his left, looking deeply uncomfortable, the consequences of accepting Crestview money apparently weighing heavier as the moment of public judgment approached. Commissioner Patricia Dawson, to Fletcher's right, kept her eyes on her notes, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the gallery. The 2 commissioners who hadn't taken Crestview contributions sat at the edges. Commissioner James Whitmore, former teacher with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for fairness, took careful notes even before the hearing began. Commissioner Catherine Brennan, former small business owner, with the direct manner of someone who'd learned to cut through nonsense, watched Diana Westbrook with undisguised skepticism. Fletcher read from a prepared statement about the rezoning proposal, his voice carrying bureaucratic flatness that made significant decisions sound routine. "This hearing will determine whether agricultural parcel TX7733B should be reclassified for residential development as proposed by Crestview Development Corporation. We'll hear from registered speakers in order of registration. 3 minutes each. Then commissioners may ask questions before voting." He looked toward Diana. "Ms. Westbrook, you may begin." Diana rose and walked to the podium with the confidence of someone who'd presented to boards countless times before, every movement calculated to project competence and authority. Her presentation unfolded with devastating simplicity. Economic arguments stacked like building blocks toward an inevitable conclusion. 500 construction jobs over 3 years. Annual tax revenue increase of $2.3 million for the county. New schools funded. Roads improved. Emergency services expanded. 1,200 families choosing to make Weld County their home. $47 million in infrastructure investment from Crestview. Partnership guarantees ensuring 80% of jobs went to local residents. Golf course and commercial center providing recreation and retail, currently requiring 45-minute drives. The numbers rolled out with hypnotic precision, each one larger than anything the county had seen in decades. Diana framed the choice as progress versus stagnation. Economic opportunity versus agricultural nostalgia. 500 families waiting for jobs versus one man holding on to land he didn't even live on. She never mentioned Wyatt by name, never acknowledged the will contest or the debt manipulation or any of the tactics she'd employed over 3 years. Just painted a picture of abundant prosperity being blocked by stubborn refusal to accept inevitable change. The applause from Crestview supporters was loud and sustained, a coordinated demonstration of support that filled the room with noise designed to suggest consensus. Ellis Mercer was called second. Wyatt watched his uncle walk to the podium with the posture of a man who knew he was making a mistake, but lacked the courage to change course. His prepared remarks lasted 90 seconds, something vague about family disagreements and community needs superseding individual preferences. His voice wavered twice. He didn't look at Wyatt or Juno even once. When he returned to his seat, Nadine was already on her phone, typing furiously. The next 45 speakers followed the same script with minor variations. Jobs and investment and growth and tax revenue, the words blurring together into a wall of sound designed to overwhelm through repetition rather than persuade through argument. By speaker 30, Chairman Fletcher was checking his watch. By speaker 40, the board members were glazing over the monotony of coordinated messaging, achieving the opposite of its intended effect. Speaker 43 made the tactical error of dropping the mask. A Crestview vice president, whose name Wyatt didn't catch, delivered his economic pitch and then added, "Frankly, properties like the Mercer Farm represent outdated land use that no longer serves modern economic needs. Agricultural preservation is fine in theory. But when a single family's attachment to the past blocks 500 jobs, we have to ask whose interests really matter here." Commissioner Brennan leaned forward, her voice cutting through the self-satisfied silence that followed. "Are you suggesting private property rights should be overridden for commercial development?" The vice president backtracked with visible panic. "That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Noted." The shift in room temperature was subtle but unmistakable. The coordinated presentation had crested and begun its decline, the repetitive messaging revealing itself as manipulation rather than organic community support. Speaker 46 represented the turning point. Thomas Fletcher, no relation to the chairman despite sharing a surname, walked to the podium in clean work jeans and weathered hands that testified to 47 years of farming. He carried no notes, his presentation delivered with the plain-spoken authority of someone who'd earned the right to judge. "My name is Tom Fletcher. I've farmed 640 acres in this county since 1978. I'm here because I know what developers don't say when they talk about economic opportunity. When they say outdated land use, they mean food production. The wheat from the Mercer Farm feeds families in 12 states. That's not outdated, that's essential. When they talk about economic future, they don't mention what happens when farmland is gone. It's gone forever. You can't unpave a golf course and grow wheat again. This decision isn't reversible. And once you've traded productive agricultural land for residential development, you can't get it back when you realize what you've lost." He paused, making eye contact with each commissioner. "Silas Mercer was my neighbor for 4 decades. He was a good man who honored his land and his community. His grandson is doing the same. That's not holding this county hostage. That's called property rights and generational stewardship. If you override those things because a developer waves money and promises jobs, you're setting a precedent that no farm in this county is safe." The applause from farmers was scattered but genuine, lacking the coordinated precision of Crestview's demonstration, but carrying more weight for its authenticity. Speaker 47 was a woman in her mid-60s whose name Wyatt didn't recognize, but whose story landed like a hammer. "Diana Westbrook came to me 5 years ago with an offer for my land. When I refused, strange things started happening. Equipment vandalism, boundary disputes I'd never had in 30 years of ownership. Suddenly I was being sued for easement violations nobody could explain. I couldn't afford to fight. My family's land is now a strip mall. Don't let her do to the Mercers what she did to me." Opal Hutchins took the podium as Speaker 48, carrying a folder that Wyatt recognized. She opened it with deliberate care. "I'm Opal Hutchins. I've lived next to the Mercer Farm for 40 years. I want to read you something Silas Mercer wrote in 2022 when Diana's pressure campaign was starting." She read in a voice that carried to the back row despite her age. "They think if they make life hard enough, I'll give up. But they don't understand something. This land isn't about comfort, it's about responsibility. It's about keeping faith with everyone who worked this dirt before me and everyone who'll work it after I'm gone." Opal closed the folder. Silas Mercer kept faith for 56 years. His grandson and great-granddaughter are keeping that same faith. If you vote to take it from them, you're not voting for progress. You're voting to reward harassment and intimidation. You're telling every farmer in this county that perseverance doesn't matter, that heritage can be bought, that money trumps integrity every single time. Speaker 49 was called at 11:47. Wyatt stood and felt Juno's hand slip into his, her small fingers gripping tight. They walked together to the podium and the entire room went silent, watching a father and daughter approach judgment. Wyatt adjusted the microphone and looked directly at the commissioners. "My name is Wyatt Mercer. This is my daughter Juno. She's 9 years old. My grandfather owned the land in question for 56 years. He died 6 weeks ago. I'm his sole heir. I'm not here to talk about jobs or tax revenue. I'm here to present facts that should inform your decision." He opened his laptop and played 2 minutes from Buck's will video, the excerpt where his grandfather explained his reasoning with perfect clarity and obvious competence. Juno watched the screen with tears gathering in her eyes. Seeing her great-grandfather for maybe the second or third time in her life, hearing his voice speak truth that couldn't be argued or dismissed. When the video ended, Wyatt distributed copies of campaign finance records to each commissioner. Second document, public records from the Colorado Secretary of State showing campaign contributions from Crestview Development. Chairman Fletcher received $47,000. Commissioner Holt received $42,000. Commissioner Dawson received $38,000. Total of $127,000. I'm not alleging impropriety. I'm ensuring the public understands the financial relationships involved in this decision. Fletcher's face went crimson, but he said nothing. Brennan and Whitmore leaned forward with increased attention. Wyatt pressed play on his phone and Opal's recording filled the room, Diana's voice threatening Mr. Patterson with consequences if he didn't cooperate, the casual cruelty of someone who'd made these threats before and expected them to work. When it ended, Juno's small voice cut through the silence. "That's illegal." Several commissioners nodded agreement. Third document, timeline showing how Diana Westbrook purchased my personal debt from First National Bank. Wyatt distributed the bank transfer documents. $185,000 in medical expenses I incurred saving my grandfather's life. Transferred to Ridgewood Holdings LLC 1 week after he died. She now controls my debt with 90 days to pay or face property lien. The same 90 days as my custody hearing with my ex-wife. This isn't business negotiation. This is financial coercion timed to maximize pressure. Whitmore studied the documents with visible concern. That's remarkably convenient timing. Final document. Evidence from my grandfather's investigation connecting Crestview Development to the land fraud syndicate that operated in Colorado in the 1990s. Wyatt distributed pages from Buck's red notebook showing shell company connections, overlapping board members' financial trails linking current operations to past criminal activity. My grandfather testified against this organization in 1994. 3 men went to federal prison. This isn't new. This is the same operation with different names and the same tactics. The room erupted in whispered conversations that Fletcher struggled to quiet with his gavel. Juno tugged at Wyatt's jacket, her whisper loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Daddy, can I show them the pictures?" Wyatt looked at Chairman Fletcher. "Sir, my daughter would like to address the board." Fletcher hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "This is highly unusual." Brennan cut him off. "Let the child speak." Juno stepped to the microphone that Wyatt adjusted down to her height. She opened her folder with hands that trembled slightly, but her voice came out clear. "My name is Juno Mercer. I'm in 4th grade. I want to show you what we did." She held up the first photograph pair. "This is the kitchen, before the sink was broken and we had no water, after we fixed it together." The simplicity of the presentation carried more weight than elaborate arguments. She showed window photographs, porch repairs, barn restoration, each before and after, telling a story about transformation through effort. These windows, we fixed them twice, once when we got there, then again after bad men broke them 2 nights ago. She showed the photograph from this morning herself, standing in front of window number 9. We fixed one more this morning, before we came here, so you'd know we didn't quit. Her confidence built with each image. It took us 9 weeks. We worked every day. Daddy taught me how to use a hammer and a level and a saw. I learned fractions from measuring boards. I learned about engines from fixing the tractor. I learned history from great-grandpa's notebooks. Brennan was smiling now, Whitmore taking notes with what looked like approval. That lady said we live in a construction zone, but we don't. We live in a home that we're building together. She said Daddy put me at risk, but Daddy taught me to call 911 when the bad men came. Daddy taught me to be safe and work hard and not give up when things are difficult. Her voice cracked slightly with emotion. Mommy's house is nice, but I didn't build anything there. At the farm, I'm building a life. Great-grandpa said land belongs to the ones who understand what it means. And I understand now. It means family. It means working together. It means not giving up when things are hard. Please don't take our home. The silence that followed was complete. Several farmers in the back were crying openly. Opal had her hand over her mouth. Even Fletcher looked affected despite his financial obligations. Wyatt put his hand on Juno's shoulder. My daughter has said what I came to say better than I could. This isn't about one property, it's about whether hard work and family legacy matter more than money and political connections. Silas Mercer kept this land for 56 years. Juno and I will keep it for 56 more. We're not selling. We're not giving up. We're going home. The room erupted in applause from farmers and scattered supporters, the sound competing with uncomfortable silence from Crestview employees who'd just watched a 9-year-old dismantle their carefully constructed economic argument. Ellis Mercer stood from the back row, his voice carrying over the noise. Mr. Chairman, may I speak? Fletcher looked irritated. Public comment period is over. I'm one of the plaintiffs in the will challenge. I think the board should hear what I have to say. Wyatt tensed, pulling Juno close. His uncle walked to the podium with the posture of a man approaching execution, each step seeming to require conscious effort. My name is Ellis Mercer. I'm Wyatt's uncle. I'm also suing to invalidate my father's will. His hands gripped the podium edge until his knuckles went white. And I'm here to tell you that everything Wyatt and Juno just presented is true, every single word. The confession emerged with the weight of truth too heavy to carry alone. Diana Westbrook approached me 6 months before my father died. She offered me $150,000 to help facilitate family communication about selling the land. I took the money. I needed it. I had debts and bad investments, and I was desperate. After Dad died, Diana increased the pressure, said I had to help her or she'd expose that I'd taken money while he was still alive. Breach of fiduciary duty, possible fraud. She told me what to say at the funeral, how to pressure Wyatt, when to file the lawsuit. His voice broke. I did it all, because I was scared and greedy and weak. But 2 nights ago, when I heard about the attack on Wyatt's property, I realized something. Diana didn't just want land. She wanted to destroy anyone who stood in her way, including a 9-year-old girl who just wanted to learn how to use a hammer. Ellis looked at Wyatt and Juno for the first time. I helped them try to destroy you. My own family. Dad chose you for a reason, Wyatt, because you understand what matters. Juno just proved it. It's not about money, it's about building something that lasts beyond quarterly earnings reports and development contracts. He straightened slightly. I'm withdrawing from the lawsuit. Nadine can do what she wants, but I'm done. And I'm sorry. Juno surprised everyone by walking to Ellis, looking up at him with the directness only children possess. Did you mean it? You're really sorry? Ellis knelt down. Yeah, kiddo. I really mean it. She processed this with visible concentration, then made a decision that came from values Wyatt had tried to teach through example rather than lecture. Okay. Daddy says everybody deserves a second chance if they really mean it. She hugged him briefly, and the gesture carried more weight than forgiveness, more like permission to try becoming someone better than the person he'd been. Diana's phone vibrated with enough force that people 3 rows away could hear it. She checked the screen, and her face went from composed to pale in seconds. The phone rang again. She stood without permission. Mr. Chairman, I need to take this. Fletcher tried to regain control. You'll remain seated. But Diana was already answering, her voice rising with each word. You can't do that. We have a contract. She listened, and her composure shattered like the windows at the farmhouse. I don't care what the board decided. After everything I've done for this project, you're making me the scapegoat. This was your operation. The room had gone completely silent, everyone listening to one side of a conversation that revealed more than Diana realized she was exposing. Please, I need this commission. I have debts. I have a daughter who's sick and needs treatment. I need... The phone went dead in her hand. She stared at it with the expression of someone watching a life raft drift away, then sat down heavily. Crestview had just cut her loose, sacrificing their broker to protect themselves from the evidence Wyatt had presented. Juno whispered to Wyatt, She has a sick daughter, apparently. That's sad, but it doesn't make what she did okay. No, baby, it doesn't. Commissioner Brennan broke the silence. Ms. Westbrook, would you like to respond to the allegations about purchasing Mr. Mercer's debt? Diana's attorney stood. My client declines to comment on private business transactions. Whitmore entered the bank documents into the record. This transfer occurred November 8th. Silas Mercer passed October 31st, 1 week later. That timing raises significant questions about intent. Commissioner Holt stood abruptly, his face showing the strain of divided loyalties finally becoming unbearable. Given the campaign contributions I received from Crestview, I'm recusing myself from this vote. I can't in good conscience claim impartiality. Fletcher tried to salvage something. Commissioner Holt, that's not necessary. My decision is final. Dawson looked at the evidence spread before her, at Juno sitting beside Wyatt, at the farmers in the back, who'd known Buck for decades. I want to state for the record that campaign contributions don't influence my votes, but I also can't ignore what's been presented today. The debt manipulation, the recorded threats, the coordinated attack on the property. These aren't the actions of good faith developers pursuing legitimate business interests. Fletcher made one final attempt. If we reject this rezoning, we're turning away significant economic investment. Brennan cut him off with the precision of a blade. No, we're protecting a property owner from predatory practices and systematic harassment. There's a difference. The vote was called at 12:37. Fletcher voted yes, alone. Brennan, Whitmore, and Dawson voted no. Holt's recusal left the final tally at 3-1 against rezoning. Fletcher's gavel came down with the finality of judgment rendered. The motion fails, rezoning is denied, this hearing is adjourned. The sound of farmers applauding mixed with the silence of Crestview employees filing out. Diana sat motionless while her attorney gathered papers. Ellis approached Wyatt hesitantly, but Wyatt just nodded once, acknowledgement rather than absolution, and walked past with Juno's hand in his. Outside, Opal was crying and hugging anyone within reach. Flint shook Wyatt's hand. with the firm grip of someone who'd fought alongside him and seen victory delivered. Juno showed her before and after photographs to farmers who examined them with the appreciation of people who understood what they represented. 6 months later, the consequences had rippled outward with the inexorable logic of cause and effect. Diana Westbrook lost her real estate broker license under Colorado Statute 12-10-217, the administrative penalty set at $75,000 for documented deceptive practices. Ridgewood Estates Development Association dissolved following an investigation by the Colorado Attorney General's office. Total fines reaching $320,000 for systematic harassment of landowners across Weld County. Crestview Development Corporation withdrew from the project, entirely absorbing $4.7 million in preliminary investment losses and issuing a statement distancing themselves from their former broker's isolated actions. Diana was personally sued by Crestview to recover the $400,000 advance she couldn't repay. Last anyone heard, she'd filed bankruptcy and relocated to Nevada, working as an insurance adjuster under a different name. Ellis and Nadine withdrew their lawsuit 2 weeks after the hearing. The legal fees they'd already incurred, combined with the collapse of any potential payout, left both financially devastated. Ellis sold his house in Phoenix to cover debts. Nadine stopped returning family calls. Wyatt never heard from either of them again, though. Ellis's monthly letters to Juno continued arriving, with apologies that grew less elaborate and more genuine over time. The 3 commissioners who'd accepted Crestview contributions faced an ethics inquiry that ended careers. Fletcher and Holt resigned before the investigation concluded. Dawson received formal public censure and chose not to seek re-election. $127,000 had purchased temporary influence but permanent disgrace. 1 year after Buck's funeral, the farmhouse stood transformed. Fresh white paint covered siding that no longer weathered gray. The wraparound porch held refinished rocking chairs that actually rocked. 15 windows sparkled clean, every one of them replaced by Wyatt and Juno working together. The roof showed new shingles guaranteed for 20 years. The barn wore bright red paint and a door that hung perfectly level. Inside, the kitchen held new cabinets and countertops, but Buck's table remained central, refinished to beauty but preserving the history in its grain. Juno's room occupied the 2nd floor, with windows overlooking wheat fields that stretched toward mountains. The study stayed exactly as Buck had left it, except for one addition, the before and after wall, now professionally framed, documenting 9 weeks of transformation from broken to whole. The Bennett Agricultural Cooperative operated under partnership between Wyatt and the Colorado Farm Bureau. 5 local farmers working the land with sustainable practices that honored what Buck had built. Opal's son worked as operations manager. Flint served on the advisory board. Juno attended meetings and learned the business side, her aptitude for spreadsheets and accounting suggesting talents she hadn't known she possessed. The first harvest under Wyatt's stewardship produced 47,000 bushels of wheat, the highest yield in 2 decades. They'd celebrated with all cooperative members, Juno helping coordinate the logistics with the organizational skills of someone twice her age. On a cold morning exactly 1 year after the funeral, Wyatt and Juno drove to the farm entrance carrying a sign they'd commissioned from a woodworker in Fort Collins. The oak came from a tree Buck had planted in 1968, the letters carved deep and filled with black paint that would last longer than any of them. They installed it together using techniques learned over months of repairs, Juno holding the post steady, while Wyatt mixed concrete, both of them working with the practiced efficiency of a team that had built something substantial from nothing but determination and refusal to surrender. The sign read Bennett Family Farm, established 1968, in memory of Silas Buck Mercer, 1940-2024. Below the dates, one line from Buck's letter, "Legacy is not money. Legacy is choice." Juno placed white chrysanthemums at the base while Wyatt photographed the installation, adding one final image to their documentation of transformation. She stood back and studied their work with satisfaction that came from completion rather than mere accomplishment. "Daddy, I understand now what Great-Grandpa meant." "What's that?" "It's not about the land, it's about what we did with the land. We built a home, we built a family, we built a life that matters." Wyatt pulled her close, this daughter who'd found evidence and called 911 and stood in front of county commissioners to speak truth with photographs as her only weapon. The weight hadn't gotten lighter. They'd gotten stronger. Strong enough to carry 900 acres into a future that honored 56 years of faith, kept by a man who'd known that some things couldn't be measured in money. At 4:30 the next morning, they sat at Buck's table eating breakfast before heading to the fields. Juno was 10 now, growing taller, but still wearing work shirts that dragged slightly. Still asking questions that required honest answers, still understanding things about value and meaning that most adults spent lifetimes failing to grasp. "When I grow up, will I take care of the farm? If you want to, that'll be your choice." She thought about this with the seriousness she applied to decisions that mattered. "I want to. I want to teach my kids how to fix windows and drive tractors and understand what legacy means." They walked out together into dawn that painted wheat fields gold, the sign visible in the distance, proclaiming choices made and kept. Behind them, the farmhouse stood whole, every window gleaming, every board solid testament to the truth that broken things could be made whole by people who refused to accept that money mattered more than meaning. Legacy is not money. Legacy is choice, and they had chosen well.
Okay, ich würde nochmal die Wall machen, Mitte. Am besten geht einer nochmal raus, Mitte. Und ich versuche erstmal am Main so ein bisschen zu scouten, ob da was kommt. Also, ich war gemutet. Geht nochmal einer Mitte raus am besten. Ich mache Main so ein bisschen Kontrolle und dann, ich sage euch Bescheid, wenn was kommt.
Ich dog Richtung Evo.
Evo,
Wollt auf B.
geh schnell.
Geh schnell, okay, komm unterwegs.
Ja,
Ult. Probably tot.
Viper down. Zu was Side,
Backside.
Beide.
Was jetzt?
Achtung.
Ich flanke, ich mache die Flankierung.
Okay. So, was steht in der Pelle?
Ich warte, bis die legen. Ich bin Main bereit. Ich halte nur Main, weil es zurückgeht. Einer Side. Tot.
Mit Pech ist
Ist bei mir. Ist durch die Molly gelaufen. Ist hier links bei mir.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, was ist denn der hier Schönes?
Schöner,
Was ist das denn?
Schöner Dart, Frankie.
Die ist sexy, die brauche ich.